So Mark, let's go ahead and jump into like immediately with the question that I've had a lot. A lot of pastors and churches, now not everybody on here is a pastor of a church, but you've kind of been sharing this idea that pastors and should consider actually starting a completely separate nonprofit as a part of their community engagement strategy. Instead of having an outreach department, you think that there's an opportunity to have a separate nonprofit that does community engagement work. Could you just freestyle on that for a little bit and just give us some of your thoughts on that and why you think that would be an effective strategy for community engagement?
Yeah, it's not only an opportunity, it's not just nice, it's necessary. It's not really going to be optional. It's in so many ways, as Steve mentioned at the beginning, it's really 21st century measurement, metrics, and sustainability. That's what this is all about, along with, of course, advancing the mission, community development, community engagement, advancing the gospel, et cetera. So at a macro view, what we're talking about is structure and sustainability. The way you structure your organizations, and particularly in this question, churches, in terms of long-term sustainability of the mission, the messaging, and of course, the money that it's about. So at the macro view, structure and sustainability. Now, from a church side, I want you to think about an American football team. So let's talk structure for a moment. And Steve, as you all know, we've talked about this before, 20th century, most pastors in America today, it's my contention, are only managing the decline of their churches. In spite of otherwise good intentions, in spite of their activity, the net effect of that over time is simply managing what will inevitably be the decline of their churches. If you accept that reasoning, then it's, as again, Steve talked about this at the beginning, why is that? Well, it's because the operating systems haven't been updated, right? So just on your computer, your smartphone, it's really a fun exercise. Somebody ought to write a blog about that or an article. But if you look up what happens when you don't keep your operating system upgraded on your smartphone or your computer, there's all these things that happen. You're susceptible to security risk. It slows the thing down. It drains battery. So there's an equivalent there. So if most pastors in America are only net effect managing decline of their churches, why is that? I would contend, and Steve mentioned this, the reason is because we're still chasing 20th century metrics, nearly a quarter of a century into the 21st century, right? So the upgrade of the operating system is related to what are the metrics you're chasing. And as I'm beginning to wade into, the structure of your church. We're still structured for 20th century ministry in the 21st century. So what does that look like? Think of an American football team. An American football team is actually a team of teams, isn't it? We talk about the football team, but there's actually three teams playing three separate games with three separate sets of players with three separate metrics, right? And they're all playing synergistically. The teams play games that are so different. They have specialist players. They have their own playbooks. They have their own coaches. We call them coordinators, offense, defense, special teams coordinators. So think about a team actually as three teams playing synergistically. You don't win a big game, of course, as we all know, unless those three teams are all functioning at a very high level, minimizing mistakes simultaneously, or you don't win. You can have a great offensive performance, but if defense can't stop the run, you lose. You can have great offense and defense, but in the last 3 seconds, we've all been there. The snap goes bad, the kick goes sideways, hits the uprights. Special teams in that moment fails, and the entire team loses. Now, what I want to suggest to you is the structure of the 21st century church is moving away from merely having an offense to also having a defense and a special teams. Moving away from enmeshment, to be specific, of spiritual and social into separate entities that are playing synergistically together. Now, to be clear, it's all spiritual, right? It's all for the sake of the gospel. But if we break down the structures, we've got to move away from offense only to defense, special teams, and think about that like a three-legged stool where the words aren't offense, defense, special teams, they're spiritual, social, financial. So if you think about it, the spiritual game is being played by pastoral types, right? Maybe your senior pastor, your lead team, and their playbook is all the things you think about a church, right? Evangelism, discipleship, worship, visiting people in the hospital when they're sick, providing children's ministry, etc. Think about that as spiritual play, the plays of a spiritual team being played by spiritual players, if you will. All right. Now, the second leg is your social leg. Think about that as we're talking about here, David, of course, as community engagement. This is the specific place where the church, which is already a nonprofit, the spiritual team, creates a second nonprofit that's under the social leg, right? And that is a legal entity, a 501c3. It's an umbrella nonprofit. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And the players playing that game are particularly those with a heart for the community. Think about MSW types, executive directors, people like that are the players playing that game. And then the third leg is the financial leg. And I'm not talking about tithes and offerings, but leveraging assets of a church to generate for-profit ROI business income. And the net effect of that on the economic side is tithes and offerings on the spiritual team, grants and donations on the nonprofit, the social team, for-profit ROI on the third team. The aggregate financial is what's going to sustain the church long-term. So I talked about structure and sustainability. So if we're going to sustain our work, not just survive, but thrive, we're going to have to restructure the church to create multiple streams of income and play smart synergistically on separate teams. So specific then to this question of the nonprofit, what you do is you create this, what we call an umbrella nonprofit. So you don't start multiple nonprofits, like somebody has a heart for foster care, so you start a nonprofit. Somebody has a heart for ESL, you start a nonprofit. If you played that game, you'd end up with 10 nonprofits, 10 tax returns, 10 boards, 10 office rentals, 10 copiers, etc. It's not smart. So what you do is you create an umbrella nonprofit focused on meeting holistic needs in a specifically defined parish or community, something you think you can get your hands around as an organization. How many of us have heard pastors say, we're going to take this city for Christ? I'm here to tell you, hey, no church is going to take its city for Jesus. I've been 40 years in ministry. I've never seen it happen in spite of all the rhetoric. But you might be able to take an apartment complex. You might be able to take a trailer park. You might be able to take a zip code. What is your defined parish, typically under-resourced, underserved, and you synergistically focus all your social assets, if you will, through this nonprofit targeting that community, and then you create multiple programs, right? So then there's maybe a food distribution program, immigration counseling, kids playing, targeting at-risk kids and using chess to, all these different things are programs in the one nonprofit. Now, if you had an existing church, you would evaluate any works of justice, compassion, and mercy that are currently under the auspices of the church and shift those into and under the structure of the nonprofit. Why would you do that? For many reasons. One is economic. You're able then to qualify for local, state, federal grants. Other churches will write you checks. Other Christians and or others in the community will send you donations for that food distribution program. They'll send it for that immigration counseling center. You can qualify again for local, state, and federal grants. None of that money is otherwise, 99% of the time, is not available if that program exists under a church. So you can't qualify in most cases for local, state, and federal funding. Churches don't write checks to other churches. They just don't do that. They don't send human resource to work in your church's program. But all of that changes when, let's just say, you have a food distribution program and you shift it from under the auspices of the church, under the structure and the auspices of the nonprofit. All of that is open to you. You're able to scale that work, right? When you only have so many dollars and so much space, et cetera, in your church, and let's say you have 3 programs of some measure of community engagement, and the 4th person comes along and wants to start a program. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any more money. I'm sorry, we can't promote this from the front anymore because we only have so much space and calling for volunteers. Again, all that shifts and changes when you're able to put that program under a nonprofit. You could have 10 programs, 20 programs. You're not limited in terms of scaling. So very specifically at a macro level, we're talking about restructuring the church for long-term sustainability in the 21st century, changing the metrics, building out this 3-team approach to leverage assets and create sustainable income. That's ultimately at the macro level why you want to start a nonprofit alongside your church.
That's great. Let me try and speak into some of this as I'm translating what you're saying. This is out of the box thinking, which is exactly what we need for the future of the kingdom of God. I think it's vital that we start to think about this stuff. I went ahead and put in the chat some of the notes that I just took. You guys can do the same. Please be putting down some questions if you guys have any for the back end of our conversation. And if you've joined us late, go ahead and put your name and organization and where you're from. I just uploaded a file, which is going to be the guiding document of all of the stuff that we do, all the conversations that we do for the Neighborliness Network. It's the framework that we use for community engagement. And so if we just look at the 3 teams that Mark was talking about, he talked about the spiritual side of it. I'm all about worship, teaching, discipleship, all of those things. I mean, that's a huge passion in my life, given the last 20 plus years of my life, to introducing people to Jesus and raising them up and sending them out in community. The second one that Mark talked about was, like this whole idea of the spiritual. What was the phrasing that you used there, Mark? It was the spiritual,
spiritual, social, financial.
So the social side, I think that we pretty much can wrap our heads around the idea. And if not, let's set that to the side for a second. The whole idea there is start a nonprofit. You're going to be able to have way more creativity in the way that you fund your ministry, with the way that you are able to engage community. I think that one is pretty instinctive. And Mark, I would like to hear a little bit more on the financial side. You talked about the for-profit ROI. If you could talk about that a little bit more and explain how you're actually funding your church and being a part of the economic development of your city out of the heart of a pastor, right? Like out of the heart of the body of Christ, you are actually making an impact economically in your community, both for people to have jobs and just in general. So what does that look like? And remember, a lot of folks are at the very beginning of this. So what could some early steps be for people to start moving towards what some of the stuff that you've seen over the last several years?
Yeah, for sure. Keep in mind, if you're just starting, I've been at this 22 years in the urban center of Little Rock. So none of this comes out overnight, right? This is passion, prayer, patience, and persistence. This is the only way this kind of church comes out, if you will, Mark chapter 9. Now, having said that, I want to make clear as well, and I already said this, but now that I've kind of laid out your offense, defense, special teams, spiritual, social, financial, it's all spiritual. You see what I'm saying? I want to make sure you hear that. It's all spiritual. In other words, on Tuesdays, we have the largest food distribution in Little Rock, Arkansas. It serves 67% of our zip code. That's 20,000+ people every month get roughly 4 to 5 days of groceries from us for free. Okay. Now that's the largest food distribution in the city of Little Rock, 3rd largest Central Arkansas. Hundreds and hundreds of people here. Okay. They're at the church building because the nonprofit lives like 2 sisters in the same house with the church. It's just structured different. So pastors and people will come by and they visit and they want to see what's going on. And pastors will say to me on a Tuesday, how many of these people go to your church? Do you hear the metric in that question? Somehow you're giving away, 800 people are getting food today. But if they don't come to church on Sunday, or if they don't get saved, somehow it's less than, or it doesn't count. And so when they say, how many of these people come to your church? I go, every one of them. What are you talking about? Every single one of them comes by. Where do you think we are, right? And so the point is that the food distribution is a spiritual work. If you want to think about it like this, the way we collectively worship God on Sunday there's a different way we collectively worship God on Tuesday and serving people. So I want to be really clear, it's all spiritual, but we're breaking it down to analyze it, like deconstruct it so you can reconstruct it, if you will, as we go. Now, The nonprofit, like you said, it's somewhat instinctive. There's so much more to say about that we're fast tracking people to nonprofit status, et cetera. But let's assume you have that. And to your last point of your question, David, what you want to do if you're just starting is you want to both have and communicate a North Star. So this three-legged stool that I'm talking about, which I've written about in a book called Disruption or the Coming Revolution in Church Economics, it's structurally, I'm suggesting you buy in, to that model. If you're just starting, you want to put that out front and center to your people. You say, we're not there yet, but here is where we're going and why. It may take 7 to 10 years, but that's the North Star. And then you would start with the low-hanging fruit. If you've got the low-hanging fruit on your nonprofit work and the possibility, go for it. If you got the low-hanging fruit on your spiritual side of your church, go for it. So start with your low-hanging fruit, but you want the complexity or of the model to be put in front of people because, for instance, if you start down the church road, the spiritual way, you get your spiritual game up and running, your players and everything's happening, and then you shift to you want to add the defense, if you will. You want to, people in your church, wait a second, I didn't sign up for that. You didn't say we're doing it. Oh yeah, you see what I'm saying? So you want people to have a North Star vision from the start and realize it's going to take you 7 to 10 years to move from survival to some measure of stability in that. So set their expectations for the long term, chase the low-hanging fruit. That's how you get started. Now, on the financial leg, specific to this question then, David, the economics of it all is just like the American household has multiple streams of income. The church is going to have to develop multiple streams of income, again, not only to survive, but to thrive going forward in the 21st century. For instance, in the 1960s, 80% of households lived the middle-class lives based on a single paycheck. Those days are gone. I could do this. In fact, I'll do it. How many of you have at least 2 or more income streams in your household? Raise your hand. Just raise it up. If you got at least 2 or more income streams in your household, raise your hand. It's most hands going up. 80% of American households today have at least 2 or more income streams. And the joke is, I guess you're all getting rich. Is that right? Because you got 2 or more income, you must all be rich. And you laugh at me. Hey, middle-class wealth, the lowest it's been since 1941, highest inflation in decades. We are not getting wealthier. We're having to create multiple streams of income just to live a generally middle-class life. And that has changed over 40 plus years. But the church hasn't changed with it because we're still relying on a single paycheck called the tithe and offering. American families don't live like that. Why would you think you could live a middle-class life, if you will, as a church, to do what God's put on your heart and sustain your work on a single paycheck? You can't do it. So the economics of the three-legged stool is tithes and offerings. That's basically your church membership contributing. You create the nonprofit to generate local, state, and federal grants. And then on the third side, it's called church economics. What is church economics? It's leveraging the assets of your church. People, money, and facilities. Those are the 3 big assets. The people you have, the facilities you have, and also the money. Not only that money you have, but the ability to aggregate money quickly. All of that is assets. By the way, if you don't have a building, I didn't have one for 15 years. So, I don't want to hear, I can't do it because I don't have a building. No, you can actually use church economics to get yourself a building. And that's a whole nother story. Now, all that's to say, church economics, leveraging assets, people, money, and facilities to advance your mission, of course, the mission of God, etc., but at the same time, generate some measure of for-profit, ROI, return on investment, income. It's a matter of good stewardship. In the Bible, Jesus tells a story of stewardship. In the American church, we define stewardship as managing what God's given you. Let's say you have a building, you've got a hole in the wall, we got to repair it. The HVAC goes out, you got to fix it. Manage what you have. Clearly record the donations and clearly communicate to your donors how you're spending the money. That's how the American church defines stewardship. I'm all about those things. That is not how Jesus defines stewardship. Jesus said, you gave me 5, here's your 5, I made you 5. Here's your 2, I made you 2. One guy sat on his asset. And the guy who sat on his asset is called a wicked, lazy steward. The American church is literally sitting on billions and billions, scores of billions, if not more, of buried assets in the ground. Church buildings that sit empty from Monday to Saturday every single week prior to COVID, throughout, exacerbated by. It's churches that own 5, 10, 20 acres of land. It's been sitting there for 10 years doing absolutely nothing. It's churches, I know of one, life example, 65 people in the church, $2.5 million endowment in the bank. Nobody's getting saved. The community's not being engaged, but by golly, to a person, they are proud to tell you they have $2.5 million in the bank. Wicked, lazy American church stewardship. So the idea is to leverage, this is a matter of stewardship. You leverage these assets to generate more. Now, we are not in it for top dollar, for profit. The simplest way to make money is rent your space. In our space, took us 16 years to get a building. It's a 100,000 square foot Kmart. We generate right now about $13,000 a month in steady, sustainable income. Our mortgage is $16,000. So only $3,000 at the moment of tithes and offerings is going to a 100,000 square foot on 8 facilities. See what I'm saying? That's smart economics, because we're leveraging an asset to generate the income. So I have more money on my spiritual side, tithes and offerings, to go to direct ministry, right? So the simplest way is rent your facility. You can monetize the things you're already doing. You already have a coffee shop, but you're giving away free coffee. Nobody in business gives away anything for free. Sell Jimmy Dean sausage biscuits, make $1 a biscuit, cover the free coffee, and recoup $5,000, $10,000 a year in free coffee, and send it to VBS or summer scholarships for youth or whatever. Nobody taught us to think like this. You can start new businesses. Nonprofits can start and own for-profit businesses. You got to play by a couple of rules, very simple. You can't give dividends to your board on net profit, and net profit has to be returned to the nonprofit budget. Play by those rules. You're not going to lose your tax exempt status. Talk to an attorney or a lawyer, make sure, because different state and county and laws are different. But generally speaking, the IRS has already allows us to make money for profit. You won't lose your tax exempt status. It's a matter of faith, a matter of good stewardship. But in the grand scheme of things, since I'm not in it for top dollar, I can rent my space for lower than commercial market. I can drop the business owner's overhead. They can pass that on to the community. So why do you pay $8 for a latte at Starbucks? Somebody owns the building. They own the building to make top dollar. So then they put pressure on small business because they lock you in at a high rate of square footage for 7 to 10 years. You can change hours, product, but you can't change that payment. That puts pressure on small business. They pass it on to the community. You're paying $8 for a cup of coffee that might cost $3. In benevolent ownership, which is what we practice, we don't have to make top dollar. I drop the rate. I get a commercial realtor. What's this space worth? He says X. I say, I'll give it to you for Y. You're like, oh my gosh, I can get all this space for this? Yes, but I want you to pass on that savings to the consumer. So those cups of coffee only cost $6 or $5 now and not $8. You're still making your margin because I, the owner, have lowered it. That's a win for the church, win for the small business, win for the community. Benevolent ownership. So all that's to say is the aggregate then, I don't have to make top dollar, but I can't give away my space for free, and I don't want to just cover my costs. If you keep giving away your space for free in the name of ministry, you won't be here in 5 years. Mm-hmm. So it's the aggregate of tithes and offerings, internal money from our membership, grants and donations from outside the community through the nonprofit, and then leveraging space in a for-profit way to some measure of ROI. The aggregate of that is what not only allows you to survive, but thrive and be sustainable, but you have to structure for that on the front end.
Yeah, and I just put into the chat, one of the things that I want to do for you guys is, and please do this yourself, like the power of this network is in each other. I just put on there a website, launchmynonprofit.com. This is a dear friend of many of ours on here. He's a part of a national law firm. I've started 6 nonprofits. We're in the middle of starting our 7th right now. And we use Trinity and their team at launchmynonprofit.com for everything that we do. They will consult with you for free if you have an idea. I think that these are the type of things, just so you guys know the rhythm of this network. Like next week, I'm going to jump online at 1 o'clock on Thursday, 1 o'clock Eastern, and we're going to talk about the stuff that Mark presented today. Okay. So like, there's going to be a rhythm of like lots of information. We can talk about it throughout the week. We can ask each other questions. Mark knows this because he does some great events. Lots of times great events happen, and then there's not a lot of follow-up because people don't know what to do next. Right. Like, or they just don't have the, if we're being very honest, they don't have the the go get it to keep on going with the things that they're learning. Mark just mentioned these Mosaic breakout conferences that he does around the country. I highly recommend them. I just was at one with him about a month and a half ago. There's one in Denver. There's another one in Phoenix that I think I'm actually gonna try and go to that one. But it's just an important thing to have space to actually follow up on these conversations. So next week, if you guys just want to put into your calendar, I am setting aside time every week, Thursdays at 1:00 Eastern time, to talk about this stuff. Sometimes I'll have friends like Mark, sometimes it'll be just me on there. And we're going to be talking about how do we actually engage community. So if you have any resources, put them in the chat and we'll make sure that we take that stuff, we'll post it online, and we're going to share resources. The whole point of this, guys, is that I am tired of talking about the kingdom of God thinking differently. I'm tired of talking about it. It's time to think differently. And I see a bunch of church planters on here. You guys are at the very beginning. If you start with this model in mind, you are going to totally, completely change the narrative of the future of your church. And so it's going to have to come, though, by your commitment to dive in, to share resources, to interact, and to learn and grow. Another thing that I wanted to let you guys know is that Mark just said that he's been at this for over 20 years. It's been 7 years since we launched our community development organization in Charlotte, and then another organization that we're now launching here in Winston-Salem, and we're still learning and growing. You got to look at this as a long journey towards community engagement, right? So learn, grow, all that stuff. And then also the other thing that I was going to say about how to engage foundations for funding and stuff like that. The reason that I've made a very generic framework for you guys for community engagement is if you have some sort of a cohesive plan on how to engage your community and you can summarize it in one page, you can use that as a framework to go to foundations and say, hey, this is our strategy for engaging community. It doesn't matter that you didn't write it. You can take it, edit it, use whatever you want. But if you start to go to foundations and say, this is our plan, this is what we're aiming towards, you're going to start seeing new money start to come in and be able to engage the work. So I want you guys to make sure that you download that. We're going to be talking about that framework almost every time that we get on here. And so, Mark, thank you so much for all of that information. Last thing for you from me before we open it up for questions. If people are just at the very, very, very beginning, okay, let's think about folks that are either involved in church or they are pastoring a church. And they want to start getting into these next two legs of the stool of social and financial. What are some really early steps that people could take, in your opinion, that would just be like Psalm 119 says that God's word is a lamp to guide our feet. I wish that we had floodlights, but we don't. But if there was a lamp that they had a step or two ahead, how would you encourage some leaders to take some steps forward to start exploring this further?
Yeah, so two things. We've already mentioned some, but I'll go back in a second. But make sure you have the right expectations. I've said it. David just said it. Most of you know, if you're planning a church, and of course, Steve led a major church planning movement with the Assembly of God, but denominations and networks typically say to a church planner, we'll fund you, we'll get you funding, whatever, for, I'm going to make it up, say 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And then our funding's going away. We're going to help fund you, but you got to be sustainable in 3 years. That's what they're going to say. They put sustainability at 2 to 3 years. And what they mean, first of all, as I already said, that is not a business definition of sustainability. Sustainability is, I own a house. This is true. Now I'm 61, et cetera. So it takes a long time to get assets like this, but I got an Airbnb on a lake an hour from here. That thing, not only every month is it rented multiple times, it makes money to cover all the expenses associated with that house. And it also makes us a profit. That's sustainability. Mm-hmm. Just merely paying your bills is not sustainability, and particularly in church planning, because as you know, what that means is that 3 years, the offerings are covering your expenses. Mm-hmm. And somehow that's magically you're sustainable. That's not sustainability. That's like me holding up an iPhone, taking a selfie right now at that exact moment in time and saying our budget covers the expenses. But what happens if your biggest giver gets sideways and moves away, drops dead? What happens if the church you're renting I'm sorry, the school you're renting ups its rent from $2,000 to $4,000 a month. We're not even close to sustainability. And particularly the kind of churches we're talking about, when you're building out a multiple, model, playing a 3D game, if you will, it's 7 to 10 years from survival to stability, and another 7 to 10 at least to true sustainability. And you need for yourself that expectation, because expectation is what leads to disappointment. So if you have the wrong expectation, we got to be 200 in 3 years, you can be very sadly disappointed. Okay, and that creates emotional angst when you're comparing yourself, or you're listening to people who did it in the 20th century but have never done it in the 21st. So have the right expectation, play the long game. Also, as I already mentioned before, go with the low-hanging fruit, put the model before your people. This is where we're going someday. If you build it, they will come. And then the last piece I'll add is keep your ears open, because once you know where you're heading, it opens up your new doors, markets, possibilities for which you can lead. So I'll just give you this example. Most pastors, it's been my experience, let's say you got a strong business person in your church, and I'm making up, they own a company, they got like 10 employees, they're successful, they're doing great. They come to your church, they like you, they're friendly, etc. And most pastors go up to that person and they'll say, "Oh man, you're so friendly. I know you've been coming here. We're so glad to have you part of it. Would you be a greeter?" What did you do?
Yeah.
You just took an entrepreneur, a business entrepreneur person, and you made him an employee in your company. Okay. I could say to that same person, "Hey, we got this first impressions. That's like new people coming in, and how do you unfold in the church again? There's all these moving parts from a new members class, but we can't quite figure it out. I know you got a business of 10 people. Do you think you could figure that out for us?" Mm-hmm. Those guys, they're going to do it. They like you, they like the church, but you just made that person a manager in your company. You know what you want to do when you have this model in mind, you're starting out. You want to keep your ears open for the nonprofit and the for-profit leaders that God sends your way they're a part of, because you know what you want to say to that guy? I got a little coffee area here, and it's costing us $250 a month in free coffee. And it's going out the door in the form of hospitality, hoping that somebody joins and maybe magically we get that money back. Do you think you could get in there and figure out a way to monetize this area so we can cover the free coffee and generate additional income for our youth program, or to hire somebody? You think you could figure that out? Whenever I talk to business leaders and I use what I'm telling you, this is what they do. They're sitting back, they're listening. And when they hear all this, they lean in. They're excited. They are tired of being employees and managers in your company. And that goes for the for-profit side as well as the nonprofit side. So if you're a pastor, if you're the spiritual, if you're like the head coach that wants to call the offense, you with me? You got to know the game plan and look and listen and pray for God to send you defensive coordinator and a special teams coordinators. And once you find them, paint the picture and empower them. You don't have to manage it. Let them lead. Here's the vision. We want to generate income someday. We want to own a building that can not only pay for itself, but make us money, bless the community, etc. Do you think you can get in and figure that out for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you can't position the players unless you know what the game plan is. And once you know what the game plan is, you can keep your spiritual eyes, your heart, your prayers open. And the second you see those people, move to them and position them.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that we have the framework is because this is the way that I describe it. When I was doing my doctoral work, my studies, traveling around the country, seeing what communities had changed over the course of 20 and 30 years, this is the way I would describe that framework. There's way more to breaking cycles of poverty than those 4 areas that you see on that framework: education, employment, economic development, healthcare, and housing. But there's not less than that. We've seen that families have to have access, individuals have to have access to those 4 areas. The reason I'm saying that is Mark keeps on talking about having this game plan. What I would say is, if somebody is coming to your church, they're struggling and they're trying to break a cycle of poverty, does your church or does your organization have an ethic on how to holistically break that cycle of poverty? Well, they've got to solidify access to education, employment, healthcare, and housing. When Mark talks about have a plan, just start there. Start with a one-page framework that says, okay, I need to learn what's going on in my area, who's doing great work already in the areas of education, employment, healthcare, and housing. Now, I believe this with every ounce of my being. Mark said it. I just preached it yesterday at a conference in South Carolina and last week in San Diego. You are not called to save your community. You are not the savior of your community. You are called to be a faithful witness and a faithful steward. And if you're a pastor, you're called to raise up, train up, disciple, send out into the community the folks that God has put under your care. Which what Mark is saying, I'm just reiterating right now, is when we had our framework, education, employment, healthcare, housing, we knew that there was a developer right there among us, a guy named Tim. And we said, Tim, could you figure out this affordable housing crisis in our community? It's not our area. And here we are 7 years later, and we're almost to 1,000 units of mixed income multifamily housing. It is the people of God being awakened. And many times the pastors are the ones that need to awaken the spiritual motivation in people to engage community. It is not the role of the pastor to save the community. It's the role of the pastor to raise up the business leaders, to raise up the nonprofit leaders, to raise up the people and say, hey, we can create some space for you to do this work and to spread the work, but it's your role to go out there and do what you're really good at. And so I would just really encourage you guys to start really thinking through those 4 areas. Of course, there's going to be more to it than that. But my friend Curtis Friday, say what's up, Curtis. He's got the wave going on there. We were just talking about this morning. He said, well, what if somebody's got a felony on their record? It's going to be really hard for them to get a job. And then that's where we start talking about, okay, that fits under the employment area, because we started to do what's called expungement clinics or expungement seminars to help people get felonies off their records that then unlocks the ability to get a job. Now, this can feel like drinking from a fire hydrant. I absolutely know that. But that's why we're going to be having ongoing conversations throughout the weeks. The only way this is going to work is if you guys interact with what's going on throughout the week and just try and show up to as many of the Thursday meetings as we can. And so I do want to answer some of the questions that are here. Stephanie, your question about how the best way to find your local, I would go to launchmynonprofit.com and submit a form, and just literally they'll reach back out to you and let you know about that. I want to highlight something because it can get lost in the chat. David Araujo is doing an amazing work in Southern California, right in LA, actually, in Southern California. He put a link on there. It's at 1:34 p.m. on the chat to a consultant group that helps people figure out how to best practices for renting your facility. That's really awesome. Did not know that existed. Mark, do you have any kind of high level thoughts on Steve's questions here? About winning grants? That's a big, it can be a minefield. But what are your initial thoughts there? I've got some thoughts too.
Yeah, real quick. So Stephanie, I put in the chat, and all of us, when you're writing the mission statement for that nonprofit, remember we called it an umbrella, you don't say we're starting a nonprofit for at-risk kids, because then what if you want to start an ESL program? You can't do it. So you basically write a general statement that says something like our nonprofit is called Vine and Village. So Mosaic Church, our nonprofit, Vine and Village, Christ is the vine intersecting the village. It's a separate name. And it says something like meeting the social, physical, material, educational, etc. needs of the community. Any word that ends in AL, and then it says in the community and beyond. Okay. So it's just broad. I can do anything under that mission. So that's that. Steve's question, of course, Steve, you could answer as well as me on this, but on the grants, one of the questions with grants is, will it limit me from doing, let's say advancing the gospel, whatever. Well, again, if you embrace the mindset that food distribution in and of itself is a spiritual work, and the way we communicate Christ on Sunday is different than that, then I don't need to worry about that. You got to play nice in the sandbox with people. And that also is being a good witness. So I don't have to evangelize or proselytize to somehow make it count. It all counts when I'm representing Jesus well. So starting with that mindset, having said that, some things you may, for whatever reason, you may want to keep it under the church and limit yourself. Okay, we won't go for grants on this program because we really want to do this spiritual thing. Okay, fine. So you would just keep it there, and that's how you play that. Our church just literally, I'm waiting on pins and needles for the money to drop, but because we're structured this way, we just got a $500,000 grant for somebody in the country that looked us up online, a philanthropy agency, whatever, and it's supposed to hit the bank any second. It's for infrastructure. I want to tell you about this and grant stuff. When you play like two sisters in the same house, that grant is given to our nonprofit, but it's for infrastructure in this facility. And the facility is shared by the church. So very specifically, $200,000 will go to HVAC in a 14,000 square foot area of worship that's also doubles for an event center and the nonprofit. Well, when we put the 200,000 in on the 500, the whole church is going to benefit from that. It's going to put in a commercial kitchen, more bathrooms, all the church benefits. So when you structure this way, that's how you chase that money. We have a $3.2 million grant from the state of Arkansas. If you have to have 10 boxes checked, we have 9. And the last one was about to be checked and Sarah Huckabee came into office. So we got to wait on her to figure it out. Now, the first thing I did when I went to the state comptroller, literally almost 2 years ago, to start this process, the first question he asked me, now, is this a church? And I said, no, it's a community development corporation buying a village. He said, hard to give away money, meaning that a church wouldn't get that money. But the state has approved us for $3.2 million on our nonprofit side, $400,000 of salaries. We take salary money, we move people on our church staff into the nonprofit like a youth worker, working with at-risk kids. Instead of funding that through tithes and offerings, we can fund it through the grant. That saves the church money. We can advance the cost. So when you structure this way, there's all these moving parts. It's all legal, but you're able to have multiple effects from one grant or one gift can actually benefit all 3 legs, because even putting HVAC in is going to build our event center business. Mm-hmm. So you say, so structuring that way is good. That's the grant. How do you chase those? You can find, like, you can go to local colleges and they'll have social programs, social work programs. People need internships, so they want to write grants. You can find grant writers, because in a lot of grants, they'll write their salaries into the grant. So it's almost like commission work. Hey, and they know where to look for grants. They can write commission in. But the other thing, if you don't have any of that money, which we didn't for, forever, you just got to sit down and make the time and do it. Writing a grant is only difficult because, number one, most people don't do it, but it's just basically following the rule. They tell you exactly how to write it. It might take you 3 weeks. So, it's so hard to write a grant. Well, that's because you're going to have to make 3 weeks of time to figure it out and, go through it, but they tell you exactly how to do it. Right. So none of this stuff, nobody gives you a silver, no silver bullets. Nobody's going to hand you a big check. But again, you got to play the long game. And if you make 1% improvement every single day, it multiplies down the road. So just try to take 1 step a day in all of these things, particularly where grants are concerned, and it'll bless you and benefit. Cooperation with other people, grant people are always looking, who are you collaborating with? Yeah. They're not just going to give it to you. You've got to be collaborative. Oh, we work with the Arkansas Food Bank. We are Hunger Relief Alliance. You show these partnerships. That's going to help you on the grant side as well.
Yeah, Mark, I was just about to say that. So that's really, really good. For instance, we've got several people on here from the Southern California Network. If the Southern California Network pastors all started nonprofits and then all decided to work together in that same area, your grant proposal would be much stronger. It's just the way it is. When you see that people are so the SoCal pastors could say, or any pastors, like you do this in your own community, you can say, okay, we're all going to start umbrella nonprofits. We're going to work together. We're going to try and split this thing up and start going after it. Now we're working as a body of Christ. Okay. So it's just thinking, I think part of what we're trying to do here, Mark, is we're trying to reframe the whole way that we think about the body of Christ inhabiting and embodying the presence of Jesus in our communities. One of the things that I was going to say is your local banks, particularly your banks that are local to your community, oftentimes have granting opportunities. You just have to ask. We just applied through our church. Now, you guys got to remember, I'm in the middle of planting a church right now. So we're at the very front end of this. We could talk about all the work we did in Charlotte with millions and millions and millions of dollars of blah, 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 blah. We're in the middle of planting this right now, and we're using a nonprofit alongside of it. So this is real time for you guys of what we're doing. I just partnered with the foundation that is our professional soccer team here in the area, Charlotte FC. We have partnered with a Christian school where we are meeting on campus at that Christian school in a very high poverty community here in Winston-Salem. I introduced the foundation to the school. They're making a $150,000 investment on our campus. Now I need you guys to follow this. The professional sports team has a they've got to give away money because it's part of their PR, just to be totally honest with you, is giving away money. I don't know where their hearts are in this thing, but they're giving away money. I said to them, hey, why don't we put a soccer field right here on campus at the school? It's going to be used all day long by the school. And then after school, we're going to be able to, open it up for the kids in the neighborhood. They said, we'll take it one step further. They said, we'll make that $150,000 investment. And then we're going to give your organization money to hire a coach that engages the community to where we can now, I get to, through our organization in the next year, we're going to be able to hire somebody who does community engagement in this neighborhood through my nonprofit, which, by the way, everybody in the nonprofit goes to our church. So it's like, you see what I'm saying? So there's various ways that you can fund getting good people alongside of you where it's not just dependent on tithes and offerings for you to be able to do that. So I just think that's really important to understand that. So local banks, we just applied for a $150,000 grant through our insurance company. So if you guys have ever heard of Brotherhood Insurance, if you have not, you need to go check them out right now. Brotherhood Insurance, they have a granting program for kingdom building stuff. I didn't even know my insurance company had a Christ motivation, right? I don't know if we're going to win it, but in the name of Jesus, if we do, I'm going to be able to hire 2 people, right? So it's like, it's just thinking innovatively outside of, I was just in a conversation this morning with somebody who's talking about that all these ideas, all these amazing ways to connect in the community, but just didn't know how to fund all the ideas, right? There's various different ways that we can fund, but we've got to start thinking differently about the way that we use the assets that have been given to us. So we got a couple of things here. Mark, why don't you share what you just wrote and give us a few thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like you mentioned, feeling overwhelmed. Remember, just use the football analogy. No head coach of a football team is also the offense, defense, and special teams coordinator. Sometimes it's just a head coach and they hire the other 3 coordinators. Sometimes a head coach says, I used to be a quarterback, so I will coach the offense, but then hires a defense. So you could feel overwhelmed from a pure, how am I going to do all this, right? You don't have to do it all. As we already talked about, you got to keep your ears open, know the game plan, empower other people, know what your gifting and passion is, and then empower others to function synergistically along with you in a team-based management type model. So I wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed that way. I wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed. Clinton asked the question, how long does all this take? That's why I'm saying, you got to play a long game, and the expectation is survival, basically startup, when you don't even know how you're going to make it at all. It's 7 to 10 years. All right. And it's going to be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And you progress, basically trying to get the 1% a day and improvement. And when I keep saying 1% a day, that's not rhetoric. Scientifically, if you can make 1% improvement every single day, 365 days a year, it has exponential effect. All right. So you're always looking for one other piece in the puzzle from every day and just keep pursuing it. So not overwhelmed emotionally or personally, and not overwhelmed by a wrong expectation of how quick this thing is going to happen. One other thing to avoid this, because that's why, most church planners, they don't make it like what, Steve, 3-4 years, maybe like I make something like 60% or 40, 50, something. They all fail within 3 or 4. Because it's America, right? Everybody wants this overnight. And you're looking at the church up the street. We grew to 4,000 people in 3 years. It ain't going to be you. Certainly not this model, especially when you bake in multi-ethnicity, et cetera. So you got to have the right expectations so you're not discouraged and it's a long slog. But to save yourself a big problem in anything, whether it's the church side, nonprofit, make sure you get as much in writing down from the very beginning. Okay? Because what most visionaries do, including me, is we're verbal. So we're going to go, hey, I got this idea to plant this church. It's going to do this, and someday it's going to be this and this. And you paint this picture, you got 10 people in a room and they're all going like this. They're nodding their head as they listen to you. Now, what's actually happening when they're nodding their head is they're interpreting your words through their own experience and grid. and
Yes.
they're hearing you through that grid. And what you said, they may interpret wrong. And that's what happens. So you get down the road 3, 4, 5 years, and now you want to raise money and buy a building, let's say. And one of these early people who was with you, stalwart in the church, they're going to come up and go, what do you mean we're buying a building? You said we're never going to buy a building. And I'm like, I didn't say we're never going to buy. Oh, no, I was in the meeting. You said we're never going to buy a building. I said, no, I didn't. I said, we're never going to buy land and build a new building. But I didn't say we weren't going to buy it. Oh, no, you were there. And they leave the church and 10 people leave with them. You know, the problem is I didn't have that on paper. So then it's my word against his word. And this is a common mistake in church planting, because the visionaries usually lead out. They're excited. They verbally explain their vision, but they don't put, and yeah, they put down their mission and their vision. I mean, that's just all general, but I'm talking about someday, 7 to 10 years from now, we hope to have a separate nonprofit with, I'm making it up, 3 staff people. We want to own a building. You want to put as much as possible along the 3-legged stool on paper and onboard people to that vision. And again, you don't have to get it totally tight. I don't want to, but it's somewhere between general and micro. You know what I'm saying? Because there's certain things you can't forecast, but you can't be just generalist when you're starting. Be specific, call people to specifics, and that will help you avoid what typically happens at the 4 to 5 year mark. This big disruption in the church, people get sideways, and it's because at 3, 4, 5 years, you start making some traction. If you hang in there and don't quit, but then people that heard you verbally early, they interpreted something wrong and they caused problems in a church. Very common problem. So get it on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we are at time right now. I cannot thank you enough, Mark, for kicking us off. I truly believe that as I've traveled the country, I think that this is just going to continue to grow. I seriously mean this. If you have friends that you know are having these type of conversations, invite them. I said invite them to be a part of this. The whole point of a little paywall is to keep people out that aren't serious about this, and then we can start to learn and grow together in this. And so thank you. Invites being sent. Thank you, Jason, for that. But we want this to continue to grow. We truly believe, and Mark, I know that you can agree with this. It's so much more fun for me to talk after like 10 years of really trying to invest in this way in communities, because when we look at it over a decade, we see that there's been tons and tons and tons of stuff done. Mark just told you about 20 plus years of investment into his community. Don't look for the quick win. And the heart posture of a church that says, I'm just celebrating the work of this community. You don't have to come to my church to play ball with us. God honors that heart posture. And if we're trying to establish the kingdom of God in our cities, as it is in heaven, it's not about my church name, and it's not about me as a pastor. It's about the community being saved by the beauty and the power of God and renovated as we work towards the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. So thank you guys so much. I already have an article teed up right now online on the Neighborliness Network on Mighty Networks. Would love for you guys to just jump on there real quick and just say what struck you as really interesting about this or paradigm shifting, and then how do you want to follow up? If you guys want to put it in your calendars, I'm planning on being online every single Thursday. I'll be online again next Thursday for just a follow-up to this conversation. The one, we've got a couple more coming up. Mark Batterson's going to be on with us talking about different ways to use kingdom property. And I've told Mark, there's not many people that are developing $100 million properties. I want to talk about your instinct from 15 years ago of what started all of this. All right. So these are the type of conversations that we're going to be having. Also, I need you guys to know this. People like Mark DeYmaz, Mark Batterson, Christine Kane, these are all my friends. They're wonderful people. The people that you don't know of, that you've never heard of, are absolute experts in their communities and in their field. You don't want to miss the ones just because they're not big names or authors. These are folks that can help you boots on the ground with the stuff. Everybody that we have scheduled is an expert in their field. And it's just a joy to be a part of this together with you guys. So I'm super grateful. Mark, do you have any final thoughts before we go?
No, I just shared them in the chat window with you all, but man, I love the network, the passion. Of course, Steve and I have been long friends. David, what you're doing. So God bless you all. And again, anything that I and or the Mosaics Global Network can help you in this journey, please let us know.
Okay, cool. And we'll be reposting a video of this in the network. All right. We'll see you guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Bye-bye.